The Library Beneath the Ivy by Enchanted Tales Hub. Chapter 1. The train had long since left the city behind, trading glass towers for wide fields and winding streams. Eliza sat with her forehead pressed to the window, watching as hedgerows and quiet, sheep-dotted hills rolled past like scenes from a picture book. The sky here was a different kind of blue, softer, as if it had been smudged with the edge of a thumb. She clutched her suitcase tighter as the train slowed, a quiet hiss rising from its brakes. The station was little more than a stone platform and a wooden bench half swallowed by weeds. No one else got off. Her aunt was not there to greet her. Eliza stood alone in the thick summer air, the station master nodding once before disappearing back inside his hut. A narrow road stretched into the trees, and beside it sat an old green bicycle with a note tied to the handlebar. Eliza, follow the lane until the ivy grows too thick to ignore. The bicycle creaked like it hadn't been ridden in years, but it carried her down the quiet path, the world hushed except for the hum of insects and the sigh of wind in tall grass. When she finally saw the house, it didn't look like much at all. More vine than stone, more shadow than shape, as if the earth had decided to keep it. Ivy clung to the walls like long fingers, wrapping window frames and curling into the eaves. The chimney leaned slightly, like it was tired of standing so tall. Eliza stepped off the bicycle and stared. Somewhere behind one of those shuttered windows, her aunt waited. Or didn't. She didn't know what she was more afraid of, the silence or the stories that might break it. The front door groaned open before Eliza could knock. A woman stood in the threshold, tall and spare, wearing a faded cardigan and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed her face. Her eyes were the first thing Eliza noticed, not unkind, but watchful like a bird's. "Eliza," the woman said. Her voice was low, careful. "You've grown." Eliza nodded. She wasn't sure how to respond. She barely remembered her aunt, only a vague scent of lavender and the sense that she was always somewhere else, even when she was in the room. "I'm Aunt Agnes," the woman added, unnecessarily. Agnes stepped aside to let her in. The hallway beyond was dim and cool, lined with old bookshelves that groaned under the weight of paperbacks and teacups. Dust motes floated lazily in the golden shafts of light from a high window. "It's a bit of a mess," Agnes said, not sounding apologetic. "You'll be in the room at the top of the stairs. Don't open any of the other doors. They stick." Eliza nodded again, her suitcase bumping against her leg. She wanted to ask why now? Why had her aunt agreed to take her in after all these years? Why had no one spoken of her in so long? But the questions stayed quiet, like everything else in the house. As Eliza climbed the narrow stairs, her fingers brushing the ivy that curled in through the cracked windows, she thought of her mother's face when they'd said goodbye. Tired, sorry, a little afraid. At the top of the landing, she found her room, small, with a slanted ceiling and a window that looked out over a wild, tangled garden. A single ivy tendril had crept in through the sill and curled itself like a question mark on the floor. She set down her suitcase and opened the window. The garden stretched below, green and overgrown, thick with wild flowers and vines. And just beyond the edge of it, something caught her eye of a low stone wall, nearly swallowed by ivy, with something unusual in its center. A shape that didn't quite belong. A door. That evening, the house creaked with the kind of quiet that made Eliza feel like she was intruding on someone else's memory. She came down for supper when the old clock in the hallway chimed 7, a soft, peculiar chime, like porcelain tapping wood. Agnes was already at the table, spooning soup into 2 mismatched bowls. The kitchen smelled of thyme and something older, earthy, like the pages of a book left too long in the dark. "Hope you like leek and potato," Agnes said, not looking up. "I do," Eliza lied. It wasn't really about the soup. They ate mostly in silence. The only sounds were the ticking of the wall clock and the gentle clink of spoons against china. Outside the window, the garden swayed in the twilight, a slow, breathing green. "You'll find it's quiet here," Agnes said after a while. "Not like the city." Eliza nodded. "I don't mind." Agnes's eyes flicked toward her, a brief glance, measuring. People think quiet means nothing's happening, but sometimes quiet is when the loudest things begin. Eliza didn't know what that meant. Not really, but she felt the weight of it settle between them. After dinner, Agnes showed her the bookshelf in the sitting room, all worn spines and soft corners, the kind of books that smelled like sleep. She didn't say which ones were hers. She didn't say much at all. On the mantel sat a photograph in a wooden frame, turned slightly away from view. Eliza reached toward it, but Agnes's voice stopped her. "Not that one." There was no sharpness in her tone, only finality. Eliza withdrew her hand. "Okay," she thought, just for a moment, that she heard something, a whisper, so faint it might have been wind or memory. But Agnes had already turned away, her cardigan sleeve brushing the edge of a hanging plant as she passed. Later, upstairs in her little room, Eliza lay in bed with the covers pulled to her chin. The ivy's shadow stretched across the floor like fingers. She stared at the ceiling and thought of the door in the garden, and of the photo turned just out of sight. Chapter 2. Morning came slowly, like light pouring into a still room. Eliza woke to birdsong and the rustle of leaves against glass. Her breath fogged the window as she leaned toward it. The garden below shimmered with dew, tangled and secretive. She found her way downstairs, her feet bare against the cool wooden floor. The kitchen smelled faintly of toast and honey. Agnes was already there, seated at the little round table, her long fingers wrapped around a teacup. A book lay open beside her plate, spine cracked and pages soft with use. She didn't look up as Eliza entered. "There's bread in the tin," Agnes murmured, "and jam in the blue jar. Help yourself." Eliza nodded and did so quietly, trying not to scrape the butter knife too loudly. They ate in silence, again, but it was a different kind of silence this time. Less like a wall, more like a hallway with a door at the end. After a while, Eliza cleared her throat. "May I explore the garden?" Agnes didn't speak at first. She sipped her tea, set the cup down just so, then looked up with those keen, unreadable eyes. "You may," she said. "Stay on the paths, mind the brambles, and don't pick the foxglove. It lies about being harmless." Eliza blinked. "The foxglove lies?" Agnes gave the smallest smile, barely there, like a moth landing. "It has a flair for drama, like most beautiful things." Eliza wasn't sure if her aunt was joking, but the corner of her mouth curled with a smile anyway. She finished her toast and pushed her chair back. "If you see the cat, don't feed him," Agnes added. "He's not ours." Eliza paused in the doorway. "What's his name?" Agnes raised a brow. "He changes it often. Yesterday it was Basil." Eliza stepped out into the morning light before her smile could turn into something too visible. The garden unfolded like a story that had been left untended for too long, edges blurred, chapters forgotten, the ink of it running wild with ivy and bloom. Eliza followed the stone path as it dipped beneath an arch of climbing roses, their petals soft as breath. Bees drifted lazily between the blossoms, golden with pollen. Somewhere nearby, a wind chime jingled, faint, like a memory trying to get her attention. There were statues tucked between the hedges, almost hidden, not grand ones, just small weather-worn things. A child reading beneath a toadstool, a hare midleaf, a woman without a face, her stone hands outstretched, as if catching raindrops that no longer fell. Eliza paused before that one, tilting her head. A small tag hung around the statue's wrist, like a label on something lost and found. It read, "For when you forget who you were reading to." She touched the tag gently. It was paper, but stiff and stained like it had weathered 100 rains. Beyond the statue, the garden thickened. The air smelled of damp roots and old leaves. Ferns curled toward the light, and a low wooden bench sat beneath a weeping willow, half swallowed by its silvery curtain. Eliza sat on the bench for a moment, listening. The breeze whispered through the willow leaves like someone sighing secrets. Somewhere in the distance, a bird repeated the same three-note call over and over, like it had forgotten the rest of its song. Then she noticed something tucked beside the bench, a thin scrap of yellowed paper. Not quite buried, not quite revealed. She picked it up. The handwriting was spidery, slanted. "The door remembers even when we don't. Be gentle when you knock." Eliza's fingers tingled, just slightly. She stood, heart beating a little faster now, and looked around. The ivy ahead grew thicker, darker. And there, at the far end of the garden, where the vines climbed like veins over stone, she saw it again. A low wall, nearly eaten by time. And in its center, a narrow wooden door, its frame arched like a cat's back, its handle swallowed by leaves. The air seemed to hold its breath. Eliza stood at the edge of the ivy-covered wall, the door just a few steps away. But she didn't move. The garden felt different here, not colder, exactly, but older. as if the ground itself remembered things no one had spoken aloud in years. She pressed her hands into her pockets and looked at the door without really looking at it. Her heart thudded gently in her chest, not from fear, not quite, more like the quiet excitement that came just before turning the page of a book you hadn't meant to fall in love with. She thought of the note beside the bench, "Be gentle when you knock," and of Agnes, her strange aunt with the careful voice and sharp eyes, of the photo on the mantel turned just slightly away, of the way her mother's voice had trembled when she'd said, "It's just for the summer, sweetheart. You'll be okay." Eliza knelt and brushed a fern aside, watching how the leaves curled in response, shy and secretive. She wondered how long the garden had been left to itself. She wondered how long the door had waited. The truth was, she'd always been the kind of girl who wanted to open things. Music boxes, windows, notebooks. Sometimes even wounds, if it meant understanding where the hurt came from. But here, in the hush between birdsong and ivy breath, Eliza hesitated. What if she didn't like what she found? What if the door didn't open? Worse, what if it did? A butterfly landed on her sleeve, pale, trembling winged. It stayed only a moment before lifting away, as if it had somewhere better to be. Eliza took a breath that smelled of earth and old green things. Then she stepped forward. Only then did she really see the door up close, the way the vines curled around it not to hide, but to protect. The way the wood shimmered faintly in the light, as though it had been waiting, patient as stone. Her fingers reached toward the handle. They were just inches from the handle when something moved behind her. Eliza froze. It wasn't loud, just the faintest rustle of grass, like something brushing past it. She turned slowly, expecting to see a bird, maybe a rabbit. Instead, she saw the cat. He sat a few paces away, poised on a flat stone, tail curled around his paws. Sleek and dark, with a white smudge on his nose and eyes that glinted gold green in the shifting light. "Basil?" she asked, half teasing. The cat blinked. Slowly. Then, to her astonishment, he meowed, a long, low, drawn-out sound, and trotted toward her. But instead of stopping at her feet, he brushed past her legs and sat directly in front of the door. He looked at it, then back at her. Looked again. Then he pawed at the ground, once, twice, and sat still. Eliza watched him, the tiny hairs on her arms lifting as if the garden had drawn a breath. She glanced at the door again. The vines had shifted not visibly, but noticeably. Where the handle had been nearly hidden before, it now sat uncovered, waiting. The cat gave a soft trill, like a prompt. "Am I supposed to follow you?" she asked. But the cat didn't move. Instead, a sudden gust of wind shivered through the garden, bending the tall grasses and rattling the leaves. The wind chime rang once, clear and sharp, like the single note of a piano in an empty room. And then, very faint, almost not real, Eliza heard it. A voice, just behind the door, not speaking, not calling, reading, Only a sentence or two, the cadence soft and lilting, like someone reading aloud to themselves or to someone else who'd forgotten how. The words were indistinct but warm, familiar in a way she couldn't explain. She stepped forward, drawn like a thread being pulled gently through cloth. The cat remained still. The voice behind the door murmured on, still too quiet to catch the words, but steady, rhythmic. Like rain on the roof, like someone turning the pages of a dream. Eliza leaned in, pressing one ear to the wood, and then, for just a moment, the voice grew clearer. She stepped between the vines, heart trembling like the wings of a moth. The words caught in her chest. She wasn't sure if they belonged to a story or to her. Maybe both. The cat flicked its tail once and looked up at her, eyes narrowed, not impatient, exactly, but expectant. The door's surface felt warm beneath her fingers now, like it had been touched by sunlight, even in the shade. The wood hummed faintly, not a sound, exactly, but something just beneath sound, like the memory of music. The voice spoke again, slower this time, as though aware of her listening. The door, of course, had been waiting far longer than she had. That's the way of forgotten things. They wait, and they hope, and they hum to themselves when no one's watching. A breath caught in Eliza's throat. Her hand tightened around the handle. But even a waiting door must be opened gently, not with force, not with fear. She looked down at the cat. He blinked once and gave the softest chirp. She knocked, the voice finished, and the story began. Eliza raised her hand and knocked. Once, twice, a third time. The vines stirred. The air shifted, not cooler, not warmer, just changed. The handle turned beneath her palm without resistance, as if the door had only ever needed her touch. The cat stood and slipped past her ankles like a ribbon, vanishing into the ivy. Eliza took a breath. The door opened with a gentle sigh, as though it had been holding its breath for a very long time. Eliza stepped over the threshold and into a room that smelled of old wood, dried herbs, and dust warmed by sunlight. The light came through a high round window, soft and golden, and dust motes danced in it like tiny, drifting lanterns. At first glance, the room seemed ordinary. A cottage room, small and square, with a low-beamed ceiling and a rug worn thin in the middle. A kettle sat cold on the hearth. A writing desk nestled under the window, scattered with yellowing paper and half-spent pencils. A chair with a shawl draped over it. A faded quilt folded neatly on a bench. It didn't look magical, but it felt watched. Not in a frightening way, more like being in a place that remembered every footstep, every voice that had ever stirred its silence. Eliza's eyes roamed the space. There was no sign of anyone, no cat, no speaker of the strange voice, only quiet. She stepped further in. Something crackled under her shoe, a page, delicate and curled at the edges. She bent and picked it up. It wasn't paper after all. It was vellum, soft and fibrous, like pressed petals. Words were written in a looping hand, To enter the library, one must listen more than look. She read the sentence twice, and then she noticed it. A sound, barely there. Whispers, not close, not loud, but many and overlapping, like the murmur of a distant crowd behind a wall or leaves speaking in their sleep. She turned in a slow circle. Her eyes landed on a wooden cabinet set against the far wall. Its doors were closed, but the whispers were strongest there. She took a step closer. One of the cabinet's keyholes shimmered faintly in the light, as if it remembered being opened. And from within, just for a moment, the voice returned. And so she found the place where stories waited to be remembered. Eliza's hand hovered over the cabinet door. The wood was dark, scarred with age and softened by time. Up close, she could see that the carvings along its edge weren't just decoration. They were letters. Faint, curling. She leaned in. A sentence, almost worn away by the years. Not all locks need keys. Some require remembering. Eliza ran her fingertips lightly over the cabinet's surface. The wood felt warm, almost alive. She crouched to examine the keyhole, just a simple brass ring, tarnished green with age. But beneath it, carved so faintly it could be missed entirely, was a tiny symbol. A moth. She blinked. The same creature she'd thought of earlier, heart trembling like wings. The thought wasn't random. It had been planted. Remembering, she murmured. Not a key. Her eyes swept the room again. The chair, the desk, the kettle, the rug, the photograph on the wall, a blurry image of someone standing beneath a tree, unreadable with age. And the shelf near the fireplace lined with small, forgotten things, a spool of blue thread, a glass marble, a cracked teacup, and a tiny metal moth. She stepped toward it, gently lifting it from its spot. It was delicate, no bigger than a coin, with paper-thin wings that shimmered when they caught the light. She turned it over in her hand. Nothing. Then, as she moved back toward the cabinet, she noticed the faintest indentation just above the keyhole, the shape of wings. Carefully, almost breathlessly, she fitted the moth into the hollow. Click! The sound was quiet but deep, like something old and buried had finally exhaled. The cabinet doors swung open on silent hinges. Inside was not shelves or dishes or folded linen, as she'd half expected. Inside was a staircase, spiraling downward, lit not by lamps, but by threads of soft, golden light that wove themselves along the walls like drifting strands of story. The whispers rose, clearer now. Books murmuring. Waiting. Eliza stood at the top of the spiral staircase, her hand still resting on the edge of the open cabinet. The air drifting up from below was warmer than she expected, not the cold damp of an old cellar, but something soft and still, like the hush of a room just after someone leaves, or just before someone speaks. The golden threads of light along the walls flickered gently, as though they, too, were breathing. She didn't step forward right away. Instead, Her eyes caught on something resting just inside the cabinet, tucked into the corner near the top stair. A pair of spectacles. They were small and round, the lenses slightly smudged, the arms thin and bent with age. One of the arms was wrapped in a faded ribbon, green, frayed at the edges, like ivy in winter. Someone had left them here, or placed them here. Eliza crouched and picked them up gently. They were warm, faintly, as if only recently set down. She turned them over in her hands. There were initials etched into the inside of the frame, almost too tiny to see. AF. Her breath caught. Agnes Fern. She glanced back toward the cottage room behind her, quiet, undisturbed. Then again at the spectacles. Her aunt had been here. Maybe still came here. A thought bloomed slowly inside her, quiet but certain. This was not a forgotten place. It was guarded, and maybe, just maybe, Agnes had been waiting for her to find it. Eliza held the spectacles a moment longer, then set them gently on a wooden ledge beside the doorway. She would not take them without asking, but their presence steadied her. She looked down the spiraling stair, the golden light, the whispering hush of voices waiting to be remembered. Then she placed one foot on the first step and began to descend. The stairs curled down like the spine of some ancient creature, each step creaking softly beneath her feet. Eliza moved slowly, one hand brushing the wall, where the golden strands of light shimmered like drifting cobwebs. They pulsed gently with her passing, as if acknowledging her not with welcome, but with awareness. The whispers grew louder, not chaotic or frightening, but layered. Thousands of voices, some soft with wonder, others trembling with sorrow or laughter or longing. Like pages being read aloud all at once, their words tumbling over one another in search of ears that could still hear. And as Eliza reached the final step, the whispers paused. All of them. A silence bloomed, vast and velvet and waiting. Then a single voice rose from the hush, not from any one direction. It came from the air itself, deep and measured, like wind speaking through stone. She has come, as the ivy foretold. Eliza's skin prickled. Her breath caught. She carries the scent of unanswered questions, the sound of locked drawers, the weight of a name spoken only in silence. A pause, then, gentler. Come in, Eliza Fern. The stories have missed you. Before her, the stairway ended in a narrow stone corridor, and beyond that, a doorway carved in arching script. Its frame shimmered faintly, as though written in starlight. Eliza stepped through the archway, and the world opened. The library was enormous, but it didn't overwhelm. It welcomed. The ceiling soared out of sight, veiled in drifting shadows and pale hanging lamps that glowed like sleeping moons. The air was still but full, as if the room itself was holding its breath in wonder. Shelves stretched in every direction, not just along the floor, but spiraling up walls, twisting in ribbons along the ceiling, even floating gently in midair, connected by narrow bridges and curling staircases that shimmered in and out of view. Each shelf was filled with books of every size and shape, some thick and leather-bound, others thin as leaves. Some glowed faintly. Others were wrapped in silk or ribbon or locked with tiny golden clasps. A few hovered inches off their shelves, as though impatient to be opened. The soft sound of whispering returned, but now it was calmer, like the rustle of wind through pages. Eliza turned slowly in place, eyes wide. Here and there, trees had grown between the shelves, their branches cradling books like nests. Lanterns hung from their limbs, swaying gently though there was no breeze. Beneath one tree sat a chair made of woven ivy, beside a table holding a steaming teacup that no one had touched. There were details that tugged at her, a scarf draped over a railing that looked like her mother's. A book with a cover that shimmered like the pond behind Agnes's house. A staircase shaped like the spine of a violin. And at the very center of the room, rising high above the shelves, stood a great column made entirely of drawers. Hundreds of them, each labeled in a looping, silvery hand. Some bore names, others emotions. Still others were blank. Eliza stepped closer. A drawer at eye level read, "The afternoon she forgot why she was angry." Another said, "The last time he saw the sea." Her fingers hovered over a drawer labeled simply, "Agnes Fern." But before she could touch it, the voice returned, softer now, close to her ear. Not yet. Eliza turned. No one stood there. Only a cat. Basil. He sat atop a shelf, tail flicking lazily, eyes gleaming with something far too knowing. And beside him, perched on a pedestal of twisted roots, rested a book. It was slim, bound in ivy-colored cloth. Her name was written on the spine. Just her name. Eliza Fern,